Welcome to our deep dive into the F-35. You shared some fascinating articles about upgrades, and we're going to break it all down, like what it means for, the future of air combat. It's wild. I mean, we're talking weapons that can hit things from hundreds of miles away, stealth tech that's always changing, and sensor systems that give pilots this crazy battlefield awareness.
Yeah, it's not just like adding more firepower, though. It's like how these upgrades work together to make the F-35 adapt better and, survive in a world where the threats are always changing and evolving.
For sure. So let's get into it. One of the articles mentioned this thing called the Block 4 arsenal. That just sounds intense. What is that all about?
Well, Block 4 refers to a whole bunch of upgrades, but yeah, the weapons are definitely eye-catching. Like, for instance, the F-35 is going to be able to carry these AGM-158 missiles. They've got a range of almost 1,000 miles.
1,000 miles? Wow. So, in theory, an F-35 could be chilling in friendly territory and launch a missile and boom, take out a target way deep inside enemy airspace. That totally changes the game, right? In terms of offense and defense.
Exactly. And it creates this deterrence thing too. If potential enemies know the F-35 can hit them from so far away, they might think twice before getting all aggressive.
Right. And it's not just range, is it? The article talked about these Stormbreaker 2 bombs. Apparently they can nail moving targets, even in awful weather.
Yeah, the Stormbreaker 2 is all about precision. Think of it like a missile with a built-in GPS. It can change course on the fly to hit stuff that's moving. That kind of accuracy is really important these days, especially when you're trying to avoid civilian casualties in cities and stuff.
So they're upping the firepower, but also being more careful with it. Kind of like walking a tightrope, right?
Absolutely. And speaking of packing stuff in, you shared an article about a thing called Six in the Bay. Remember that?
Vaguely. It had something to do with squeezing more missiles into the F-35's internal weapons bay.
Yeah, that's it. They're modifying it so we can carry 2 more air-to-air missiles inside.
Yeah.
It's all about maximizing firepower, but keeping the stealth profile,
So this Six in the Bay thing, does that mean it could engage multiple enemy jets at once while staying hidden? That seems like a big advantage if you're in a dogfight.
Exactly. It gives pilots a big edge, especially in those super intense engagements.
It all sounds crazy advanced, but I'm curious about something. One of the articles said that the F-35's stealth coating can degrade over time from stuff like seawater or bad weather. I always thought those coatings were basically indestructible.
They're super durable, but even the toughest materials have limits. Think about it like the paint on a car. Even the strongest paint will eventually chip if it's constantly exposed to the elements, right? Same deal with the F-35's coating. But they're always working on it, testing new coatings that are even tougher, with a mirror-like finish.
Mirror-like. So the F-35 will be stealthy A&D shiny. That's a cool combo. But why is stealth so important? With all these weapons upgrades, wouldn't the F-35 be able to just blast through any defenses anyway?
Stealth isn't just about not being seen. It's fundamental to the F-35's survival. It can operate in enemy airspace, gather intel, even launch attacks without them knowing it's there. These new coatings not only enhance stealth, but also reduce maintenance, so it can stay in the fight longer.
So it's not just about hiding, it's about staying in the game. Makes sense, but wouldn't you need some really powerful sensors to go with all that stealth?
You're totally right, and that's where things get even more interesting. The F-35 is getting a big sensor upgrade, including this advanced radar system, the ANAPG-85. And an electro-optical targeting system, the AEOTS.
Those are some serious names. What do they actually do?
Well, the ANAPG-85 radar is insanely powerful. It can detect and track things from way farther away with crazy accuracy.
So it's like giving the pilot a much clearer picture of what's happening out there.
Exactly. And the AEOTS system, it's like giving them superhuman vision. It's got enhanced night vision, zoom capability, and it can even see heat signatures. So even in tough conditions like darkness or smoke or bad weather, they can still find and track targets.
So if they can see in the dark, zoom in on targets, and detect heat, that's insane. But with all this info coming in, wouldn't the pilot be totally overwhelmed?
That's where sensor fusion comes in. All that data from the radar, the AEOTS, other sensors, it's all processed and displayed in a way that makes sense.
So instead of too much info, they actually get a better understanding of the whole battle space.
Exactly. It's all about helping them make decisions faster.
Yeah.
And react more effectively in a fight.
It sounds like the pilot's role is getting even more important then, even with all this tech.
Oh yeah, they're becoming more like mission commanders, overseeing this complex web of information and firepower. And as the F-35 keeps evolving, the demands on the pilots are only going to grow.
This is starting to feel like a sci-fi movie. But seriously, what does this mean for the future of air combat? Is the F-35 going to be like the undisputed king of the skies?
The F-35 is definitely a game changer, but it's bigger than just specs. It represents a total shift in how we think about air power.
A paradigm shift? Like, what do you mean by that?
It's a fundamental change, a different way of thinking. The F-35 isn't just a faster or more heavily armed jet. It's a whole different kind of weapon. Stealth, sensor fusion, network connectivity. It's changing the battlefield completely. It's not about who's got the fastest or strongest plane anymore. It's about information, knowing what's going on, and being able to act fast in a chaotic situation.
So it's not just a weapon. It's like this strategic thing that's changing warfare itself.
Exactly. And it's still evolving. As technology gets better, so will the F-35. We're just seeing the beginning of what it can do.
This is a lot to take in. We've gone from talking about specific weapons to like the big picture implications for war.
And we've barely scratched the surface.
This is a deep dive for sure. But before we go full on sci-fi with like futuristic dogfights and AI drones, let's get back to basics for a minute.
Okay. What were you thinking?
Like the practical stuff. Where are these upgraded F-35s being built? And how long does it take to actually get them into service? Well, I know from the articles that the F-35 isn't just built in one place. It's like a whole international program, right?
Right. The F-35 is produced in a few different countries. The U.S., obviously, but also Italy, Japan, Australia. It's really a global thing with a lot of different countries involved, both building them and buying them.
So it's not just a tech thing. It's like a symbol of countries working together on defense.
Yeah. It shows that they're committed to global security and working together on something this complex.
That's pretty cool. But on a practical level, I'm curious about how long it actually takes to build one of these things. With all that tech, it can't be quick, right?
Definitely not. Building an F-35 is really complex. There's a huge network of suppliers and a bunch of different stages to put it together. Start to finish, it can take months to build a single plane.
Months? Wow, that's way longer than I thought. It's not like they're just pumping them out like cars.
Nope. It's way more specialized and demanding. Each F-35 is kind of custom built to meet the needs of the country that's buying it.
That makes sense. So if it takes months just to build one, how many of these upgraded F-35s are they planning to make?
Well, right now it looks like they'll make thousands over the next few decades. It's a big undertaking with some pretty big implications.
Thousands? That's a crazy number. What does that mean for, like, balance of power in the world? If that many countries have these advanced jets, it has to change things up, right?
That's a good question. And there's no easy answer. When you have this many advanced jets like the F-35, it definitely affects things like international relations and military strategies. It's something that experts and policymakers are thinking about a lot right now.
It's definitely something to think about. We've covered a lot here. From the specific F-35 upgrades to the bigger picture stuff about how it affects things globally, this deep dive has been super informative.
It's been great talking about this with you. I hope we've given you a better understanding of what it can do and how it might shape the future of air combat.
Before we go, though, there's one thing I'm really curious about. We've talked about the tech, the production, the global stuff, but what about the people who actually fly these things? What does it take to become an F-35 pilot?
That's a really good question. And it's one that people don't always think about. The pilot is so important in the F-35. These guys aren't just good pilots. They're like highly trained tacticians, information managers, decision makers. They're operating at the very edge of modern warfare.
It sounds like flying an F-35 is totally different from flying a regular plane.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. The F-35 systems and sensor fusion are so advanced, you need a new kind of pilot, someone who can take in information from all these different sources, make decisions super fast, and manage all the plane systems while doing crazy maneuvers.
So it's not just about, like, stick and rudder skills anymore.
No way. It's way more than that. They need to be experts in systems management, data analysis, strategic thinking. They're basically flying supercomputers that can also fight.
That's wild. What kind of training do they go through to get ready for that?
The F-35 pilot training is really intense. It's a mix of classroom stuff, simulator exercises, and actual flying. And it gets harder and harder as you go. They learn everything from basic flying to advanced combat tactics, electronic warfare, sensor operation, mission planning. They even train to work together with other F-35s and allied forces, like they're all part of a network.
Wow. Sounds like a super comprehensive program. How long does it usually take to go from like a brand new pilot, someone who can fly an F-35 for real?
The whole process can take years. It depends on what experience the pilot already has and what specific track they're on. It takes a lot of time and money. but it's important to make sure they're ready for the crazy world of modern air combat.
I can only imagine the kind of dedication it takes to make it through that. These pilots are doing some seriously groundbreaking stuff.
They really are. And as tech keeps advancing, it's only going to get more demanding. The line between human skill and technology is getting blurry.
It makes you wonder about the money side of things. All this tech, the global production, the intense training. It can't be cheap, right?
You're right, it's not. The F-35 program is one of the most expensive weapons programs ever. And these upgrades are going to add to that. It's a huge investment.
So the question is it worth it?
That's a tough one. There are good arguments on both sides. People who support the F-35 say it's crucial for staying ahead in the global security game. They talk about its advanced capabilities, how versatile it is, and how it can prevent conflicts from even starting.
So, like, staying one step ahead and stopping fights before they happen.
Right. They believe it's necessary to keep things safe and stable in a world that's becoming more and more unpredictable.
I get that.
Yeah.
But what about the people who don't support it? What are they saying?
Well, critics of the program say the costs are out of control, way more than they originally planned, and that is putting a strain on defense budgets. They also point to the problems it's had in the past, like technical issues and delays, and how hard it is to keep a plane this complicated running smoothly. They think all that money could be better spent on other important things, like education, healthcare, infrastructure.
So it's like the classic debate, guns versus butter. How do we balance national security with domestic spending?
That's the tough question policymakers have to answer. It's a balancing act. And there's no perfect solution.
It's a lot to think about. We've gone from being amazed by the F-35 to thinking about some pretty big questions about defense spending and what's important for the country.
That's what deep dives are all about, going beyond the surface, looking at all sides of something. The F-35 isn't just a cool plane. It brings up questions about defense, the economy, even the future of war itself.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just a machine. It shows us how complicated the world is.
Exactly. And before we get too serious, maybe we could look at a different side of the F-35, something a little lighter.
Sounds good. What were you thinking? Well, we've talked about stealth and weapons. What about electronic warfare? That sounds pretty interesting. And it could be a game changer in modern air combat. Okay, so electronic warfare, it sounds kind of like a spy movie or something. What does that even mean when we're talking about the F-35?
Well, think of it like this. It's about controlling the electromagnetic spectrum. It's like this invisible battlefield where all the radar and radio signals and stuff are happening. The F-35 has systems that can detect those signals, analyze them, and even mess with them to its advantage.
So it's like the F-35 is a hacker, but instead of computers, it's hacking radar and communications.
Exactly. It can jam enemy radar so they can't track the F-35 or other friendly planes. It can disrupt their comms so they can't talk to each other. It can even trick their sensors, make them see fake targets or hide the real ones.
That's pretty crazy. So it's not just about being invisible itself. It's about making the enemy confused and messing up their view of the battlefield.
Right. It's like an extra layer of protection for the F-35. It makes it even harder to deal with in a fight.
But earlier we were talking about the F-35's own radar and sensors. Those are really advanced. Doesn't that make it vulnerable to electronic attacks too?
It's a good point. As technology gets better, both sides are always finding new ways to use electronic warfare and new ways to defend against it. It's like a constant back and forth, a tech race.
So the F-35 is both good at electronic warfare and a potential target of it.
Yeah, that's the reality of modern air combat. It's this mix of technology and strategy and always having to adapt to new threats.
This whole deep dive has been amazing. We've covered so much, from the nitty-gritty of the F-35's upgrades to how it affects global strategy. We even talked about AI in warfare, which is kind of mind-blowing.
It's been a really interesting conversation. The F-35 is more than just a plane. It's like a symbol of how much technology has changed, how countries are working together, and how warfare itself is evolving.
You know, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You said the F-35 is more than just a weapon. What did you mean by that?
I think it shows us how many different things are happening in the world right now. The technology itself is incredible. It's like the cutting edge of what we can do with planes. And it's being built and developed by a whole bunch of countries working together. It shows how important it is to cooperate on things like global security. And just by existing, it makes us think about how war is changing and whether all this new technology is being used ethically.
That's a really good way to put it. It's not just a piece of metal. It reflects all the complicated stuff going on in the world today.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. We have to make sure it's being used responsibly.
That's a great point to end on. I want to thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into the F-35. It's been really eye-opening, and I'm sure our listeners have learned a ton.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. We hope you've got a better understanding of this amazing plane and what it means for the 21st century. Until next time, stay curious.